I don't know how to say this, but it wasn't what I was expecting. My body kept telling me to quit. There are some things that can only be experienced in failure. I've heard it said before, what brought you to where you are today may not be what takes you to where you need to go. And I'll be honest, what kept me from publishing a new episode was, welcome to the One Step Podcast, where we share stories of change makers in different fields. So you don't have to wait for one day, but instead you can take one step today in creating a change in your life and in the lives around you. It's been a while since I last published an episode, and I can say I definitely missed it. There's been plenty that I've been navigating through that I'll share later. But early this year, I came back from the Miami Marathon, and I don't know how to say this, but it wasn't what I was expecting. For those of you who don't know, this was my second marathon. I first ran the New York Marathon with the main goal of fundraising for a nonprofit whom I love called Charity Water. And I finished it in 5 hours and 26 minutes. Well, this time, I ran the Miami Marathon with the goal of pushing myself to beat my record with an audacious goal of 4.5 hours. And it was stunning. Beautiful Miami scenery with crowds cheering you along the way. 18,000 runners in beastly Miami heat that day. Towards the end, my body kept telling me to quit. But thankfully, there were second wind moments, being reminded by loved ones that I can finish this strong. And after completing the marathon, there's no other way to put it other than I failed. I finished the marathon in 5 hours and 13 minutes. And as I've been processing, part of me wants to hide that failure. It's one thing to go public with setting a goal and being able to say, we did it. We met the goal. It's another thing to publicly admit that I didn't. So of course, a normal reaction would be to want to hide that failure, if that's all there was to the story. You see, during training and even the marathon itself, there were lessons I was learning along the way that, as I've been reflecting, I wanted to share with you. And the first being that I had to learn to not over-rely on past success for current growth. I remember during training, whenever it got challenging, there were encouraging thoughts of, yes, I can do this because I did it before. But then there were tempting moments where I thought, I don't have to try so hard. I've done it before, so I know I can do it again. And training this time made me set aside past wins and focus on the present moment. We see the same thing in sports as athletes are continually conditioning during the off season. They know that just because we made it to the championship last year doesn't guarantee us we will make it this year. And I think this applies to way more than just physical training. In all that we're pursuing, whether that's building a project, developing a habit, or perhaps growing in your faith journey, all of it requires to continually being diligent today. As I've heard it said before, what brought you to where you are today may not be what takes you to where you need to go. Jeff Bezos has shared how the secret for his team building Amazon wasn't waiting for one day, but instead treating each day as if it was day one. The second lesson that I've had to learn is that there are some things that can only be experienced in failure. About 3 weeks before the Miami Marathon, I had to run 21 miles during training. Now, if you remember from the episode reflecting on the New York Marathon, I explained how working up to 21 miles changed my perspective, where I once thought running 13 miles was the hardest thing ever, now became an easier thing to accomplish. Well, this time around, running 21 miles during training was probably my worst performance. I ran it in 4.5 hours, and the pace I was going, I would have finished the full marathon over 5.5 hours, which would be even worse than my time in the New York Marathon. Needless to say, that performance initially made me really nervous about Miami. Soon enough, though, thankfully, I felt this ambitious determination to not allow that to be my story. My friends would say, "That's that dog in you." I had to go back to the drawing board and figure out what didn't work, what did work, and what I need to change. I do believe taking the time to evaluate and rethink the plan played a big part in performing better in Miami. And even with that, I still aim to run a marathon under 4.5 hours. I know it's possible. So many people have done it. I know I need to rethink the strategy in getting there. Craig Groeschel, who I quote often, had shared some great words in regards to failure. I wanted us to check this out.
I believe also, I want to create a culture that can handle some failure. In other words, in fact, if we're not failing every now and then we're not trying enough new stuff, I think.
That's exactly right.
So, if you fail all the time, you're in trouble. But if you're not failing every now and then, you're probably not being aggressive enough. So what I want to do is create a culture that says, hey, not everything we're going to do is going to work. Some things will fail. I came across a big organization I respected. They said, when you get to our size, you'll understand failure is not an option. And so it hit me like, no, please, no. And so I tell our staff, failure is not an option, it's a necessity. Because oftentimes we really learn more out of when we don't succeed than we do learn out of the things that do work. So we want to create a climate that does allow for that.
This is the perspective I'm holding on to regarding this marathon. Yes, I didn't reach my goal. Yeah, I see it as a step toward my goal. I recognize that attempting to shave off a whole hour with minimal experience I have is audacious, but I believe it's worth trying. Something I challenge myself with growing up is I'd rather fail trying to reach for the sun than succeed only reaching for just the moon. Because at least when trying for the sun, I'll reach the planets along the way. And an example of this that I think of is when I raised funds for Charity Water. When I ran the New York Marathon, that was actually my third time fundraising. The first time was donating my 16th birthday to raise $500. With my perspective of money at the time, that was a lot of money. Thankfully, we reached the goal. The second time was donating my 20th birthday with the audacity of trying to 10x the first campaign by trying to raise $5,000. I tried new strategies this time, and in short, we came nowhere near the fundraising goal. At one point, I even lowered the goal to $1,000, and we didn't even reach that. We ended it with $780, which was slightly more than the first time around. There were plenty of lessons that I learned along the way on things that I could have improved on and done differently that I used the third time around. When I ran the New York Marathon to fundraise $6,000, I contributed the first $1,000, which left the same audacious $5,000 amount left to raise as the second fundraiser. And together, we raised over $6,060, which will be bringing 151 people access to clean water. In essence, that $5,000 goal was the sun I was trying to reach. That second campaign was the planets in between. And that first campaign was the moon. And look, let's not minimize it. Reaching the moon is significant. It's what sets the trajectory for everything to follow. The third lesson that I had to reflect and internalize is that it may be imperfect, but it's not impossible. I'm reminded of the story of the 4-minute mile. In case you haven't heard, since 1886, runner athletes worked diligently to try and run a mile in 4 minutes, yet nobody was able to do it. People thought it was physically impossible. Experts predicted that these were the perfect conditions that were needed to do it. Perfect weather of 68 degrees and no wind, hard, dry clay for the track, and a large, encouraging crowd along the way. Well, there was a 25-year-old named Roger Bannister who was unconventional, as he had minimal coaching and designed his own system to try and break the record. Well, the media criticized him for his approach. In 1954, on a cold, wet day, Roger ran his race and beat the 4-minute record. After at least 68 years, Roger did something under non-ideal conditions that everyone thought was impossible. But what was crazy is not just his success. Just 46 days after Roger broke the record, another person named John Landy broke it as well. A year after that, 3 more people did it in a single race. And since then, well over 1,700 runners have broken the 4-minute mile. Here's what I see. Pursuing the impossible may not only break barriers for you, but also may unlock something in others. People may be counting on you and me to break what seems impossible in your story, to see what is possible in theirs. The journey is imperfect. It took the famous YouTuber Casey Neistat 17 years and 25 marathons to finally run one under 3 hours and get to tell the story. The Wright brothers were self-taught engineers and were not well funded compared to others. And after failing time after time again, they finally built the first ever powered airplane. And you can clearly see how the impossibility they broke caused what is possible in the aviation industry today. Each of us has our own quote unquote marathon to run. A long-term journey that we are navigating as we pursue different outcomes. And at times, we do feel discouragement. I know this all too well, as I've personally been navigating different challenges this year and feeling the weight of it. I can often expect perfectionism from myself and be my worst critic, thinking, Jonathan, why can't you just get it right? And I'll be honest, what kept me from publishing a new episode was, yes, needing to take time for myself to process, but also wanting to avoid being a hypocrite. I don't always feel like I'm able to live out the slogan, take one step. But I do believe that no matter how long it may take, we can get to that place where we are able to do so. And I want to encourage you, friend, whether you've been too afraid to take a chance or feeling too defeated to get up after a failure, that today can be day one. Don't worry about tomorrow. Today has enough of its own troubles. Don't live in the past, as it's already gone. Today is a new day to start again. A question that I've been asking myself this year that I leave with you. Why couldn't this be the year where we experience real momentum and life change? Let's journey through this chapter of our life together. Thank you for listening to the One Step Podcast. If you'd like to see the video of the Miami Marathon itself, go ahead and visit the link in the description. You can also visit our website, onesteppodcast.com, where you can find our social media links, get updates, and even leave a voice message. Who knows, you could get featured on a future episode. Now remember, change begins and continues with one